Hi, I'm Catherine Camp. We've been talking a lot about philosophy and how your core philosophical beliefs will lead you to live your life based on those core philosophical beliefs. So what happens when you have a whole generation of young adults who don't believe that there really is an ultimate being? This actually happened. It's still happening today. But we saw the first big wave of it in the 60s and early 70s, where we saw many college-age students going over to India and countries where they could seek a deeper meaning to life. Because see, in reality, we are all seeking a deeper meaning in life. And when you take God out of the picture, you need to fill it with something. And these young people realized there was something missing in their life. It was something spiritual. So when they came back with ideas based on Hinduism and Buddhism. And some even came back with ideas of animism, meaning worshiping or seeking dead ancestors. Somehow, over time, that began to seep into the church. And that is because the church has been trying to be accommodating to people in the culture to bring them back in. But the problem is they compromised the gospel in so doing. And the New Age began to seep deeper and deeper into the church. And we see great evidences of this today. Today we'll be talking about the New Age, because this Hinduism and Buddhism that came into our churches, that came into the United States, this way of thinking was a different type of philosophy. And we saw the rise of the New Age movement. Today our guest is Marcia Montenegro. She was a New Age astrologer and has inside understanding of the New Age and how it is dangerous when it seeps into the church. I hope you'll stick around. Welcome to Faith and Culture. Let's get started. Marcia, thanks for joining us today. I'm glad you could come in and give us a little bit of understanding about the New Age religion and how it kind of has seeped into the Christian church and is pretty much embedded there. Where do you want to start?
Yes. Hi, Catherine. Thanks for having me on with your show here. Well, yes, there are many things to address in that topic. I want to briefly give my definition of the New Age so people know how I define it and what we're talking about, because a lot of people hear the term, but they don't really know how to identify it. The New Age, I define it as a network of different beliefs that stem from three major areas. The Gnostic area is the first one. And Gnosticism briefly divides the material and spiritual, makes the spiritual superior to the material. So everything's spiritual and spirit oriented, and also believes that you need to have kind of secret teachings. In other words, the truth is not something you just obviously know and that most people know. You have to find it out in certain ways. So that's a Gnostic part of it, which of course Gnosticism was one of the first enemies of the church.
Right.
Some of the New Testament books actually address the early form of it.
Paul in Colossae had a lot of problems with that.
Yes.
John's epistles begin to talk about it because after all of the other disciples, the main disciples died off, then John was left behind, and that Gnosticism really started to seep into the church, even as that far back. He warns us about it.
Yes, he did. And First John especially has some passages, and you're right, Colossians does as well. So, and that has never really gone away. It just kind of changes form, but it's still around.
Yes.
So it's a big part of the New Age. Another area, of course, and a huge area, is the Eastern religions, mainly Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. Taoism is an ancient Chinese religion that actually came from shamanism around the 8th century BC in southern China. And it developed over centuries, and it had a lot of different teachings and teachers. And I read a history of it, a history of it one time in a book, and it was the most entangled, convoluted history. It would be very hard to outline the history of Taoism. But the Taoist beliefs like yin and yang, the belief in an energy called qi or qi, the practice of acupuncture and acupressure, these all come from Taoism. Mm-hmm. And so that's a big area. Of course, Hinduism is probably one of the main areas as well. The belief that there is a self that is like divine and connected to God within, or is actually divine. And then Buddhism, which has some similarities with Hinduism, but is a little different. Buddhism has influenced the culture as well. And Buddhism tends to influence us in the ways that, for example, mindfulness has been very popular. And that is a Buddhist form of meditation, which actually I practiced for 12 years before I was a Christian. Because I was into.
I'm sorry.
No, okay. I was just going to say I was into Buddhism.
Okay. Oh, that's very interesting. That's a interesting religion, because they say they're atheists, yet they have little trinkets that they worship.
Yeah, technically they're like non-theists. They don't really deny God, but they don't affirm it. Well, Buddha supposedly never denied a God, but he never affirmed a God. Mm-hmm. And yes, if you just look at Buddhism in the teachings, there's no God. But when you look at the practices, what happens is a lot of people either make certain figures into gods, like the Bodhisattvas. The Bodhisattvas are supposedly enlightened beings who they're so enlightened that they don't have to have rebirth, but they haven't gone to the state of nirvana yet because they have compassion for people who still need to get to that enlightenment stage. Now, and so they kind of guide people on earth. That's from Mahayana Buddhism, which is Buddhism in China, Tibet, and Japan.
Is that how, are you saying Buddha Vista? That's how I pronounced it, but are we saying the same thing?
I'm saying Bodhisattva, Bodhisattva.
Okay. Did they believe that that's what Jesus was?
They might. I mean, some Buddhists might. I'm not sure. If I don't, that's probably not an official teaching, but it could be that some Buddhists would believe Jesus was a bodhisattva. Yeah.
Okay, because he was enlightened and stayed behind. I also have heard him called an avatar.
Yeah, that's very common that he's an avatar. That comes from Hinduism.
Okay.
So, yeah, an avatar is technically a incarnation of the god Vishnu. And he incarnates at different times in history, but that term kind of became loose in the New Age. The New Age, when they adopt these ideas, they kind of put their own spin on it, and it sort of evolves. It just kind of evolves into whatever it's going to be based on how people use it. Mm-hmm. And so avatar in the New Age is an enlightened being who incarnates at will. Okay. And so a lot of New Agers think, and I believe Jesus was an avatar as well.
Okay.
The avatar of the age of Pisces, which is a whole topic in itself.
Right. So that's something that you actually believe?
Yes. I wrote some articles on it for New Age magazines. I wrote for New Age magazines. Yeah.
So get a hold of those.
I know. I mean, I was really involved, very involved. So that's those ideas are very much in the New Age. Now, not everyone in the New Age necessarily goes for that. They don't necessarily get interested in Hinduism or Buddhism, but those concepts are there as part of the New Age. So those are the three areas of the Eastern spirituality. And then the third area that is a source for New Age, and it's a big one, it's the New Thought movement.
Well, before you move on, you talked
Okay.
about Taoism.
Okay.
And I remember I guess it was the early 90s, there was a big push for Taoism in the American culture. And I'm sure you're going to talk to us a little bit about this, with the New Age really getting kind of enmeshed in our culture and moving into the church. Because I remember my hairdresser introducing me to a book called The Tao of Pooh.
Oh,
have you heard of that one?
yes, yes.
Pooh on the front.
Yes.
And I read it, and of course it makes very sense, because you are searching for peace. You're searching for an equilibrium in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when you're really young, you're very impressionable. And I was a Christian, maybe a nominal Christian at the time. But to me, it made a lot of sense. So I didn't think anything about it. So I can see how that can easily start to infiltrate the minds of Christians. And now, wasn't it George Lucas who created the Star Wars series, because he's a Taoist? And so everything in there, he's trying to show people basically how to find equilibrium, and there will always be good and there will always be evil.
Evil, yes. Right. Exactly. Okay. The dark and the light side of the Force. I have done a lot of Facebook posts on Star Wars and the influence of Eastern beliefs on George Lucas. He was also influenced by Joseph Campbell, who was influenced by Carl Jung. And the whole shadow side thing, where Luke Skywalker realizes Darth Vader is his father, and he confronts him. That's very Jungian. That's very shadow side kind of drama. But I have articles for people who want to know on 3 of the later Star Wars movies on my website, christiananswersforthenewage.org, if people want to read them. And you're right, the Taoist view is very strong in the Star Wars movies, very much. And I can talk about that a little bit, talking about the influence of the New Age. But it's very strong in Star Wars. And you're right, everything has to be balanced, because even when they choose the bad guy, whose name eludes me now, the bad guy.
Darth Vader?
Yeah, but what was his name before? He had another name before. It's out of me. Yeah, he's in the movie. They show him when he's younger, and he's a good guy, and then he gets seduced over to the dark side.
Okay.
And I don't know why his name's evading me, but it is. Most people who have watched Star Wars probably know who I'm talking about.
They'll know. Yeah,
they'll know. It's Darth Vader, but it was his name before. And one of the characters says, "Yeah, the forces we have to balance the force." Mm-hmm. So I heard that phrase, "We have to balance the force," has to be balanced at least 3 times in the Star Wars movies, in different Star Wars movies.
Okay,
so
well, you know what to look for.
Yeah.
The unsuspecting person is kind of just watching.
Well, I saw the first 3 Star Wars movies when I was into the New Age, and I recognized the Eastern and occult concepts. Mm-hmm. Yoda teaches a lot of occult concepts. And I recognized them, and I thought, wow. And of course, the movies were blockbusters.
Yes.
The theaters were packed.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, all these people are watching this movie, and it's showing all these ideas that I believe, which I knew were not mainstream in the culture. And I was astounded that people accepted it so readily. I mean, of course, people saw it as entertainment, but of course, I'm hearing the ideas and the concepts. That's what hits me. So anyway, that's a whole big area there, the Star Wars movies. And that's the Eastern religion. Then the third one is the New Thought movement. The New Thought movement is huge, and most of the time when I say that, most Christians kind of have a blank look, like, "What are you talking about?" Because that term New Thought isn't really, you don't really hear that much.
No.
But the New Thought movement is a movement that really started maybe back in the 18th century, but it kind of took hold in the 19th century in this country with various teachers. It came actually out of spiritualism. Spiritualism is a belief in contacting the dead. It's a belief that after you die, you start going through stages of getting more knowledge. And so that's why they believe in contacting the dead, because they believe they can get kind of get taught, this higher level of knowledge from dead people. They really kind of revere the dead. It's really strange, but that's what spiritualism is. And spiritualism itself was a very complicated movement, but out of spiritualism came New Thought. So the early New Thought leaders also often practiced spiritualism and contact with the dead. And there was a series of teachers in New Thought. Phineas Quimby is one of the most famous, and Anton Mesmer is another one who actually was earlier. Anton Mesmer, we get the word mesmerize from him, because he did these strange things, which basically was hypnotizing people. He was supposedly healing them. And he had these very odd ideas about this kind of energy that you could tap into to heal, sort of an ether. And that came from spiritualism. And spiritualism was also very much into healing. And Anton Mesmer had some of those ideas, and he was teaching that he could control this energy to heal people. But actually what he was doing, whether he was doing it on purpose or not, I don't know, was sort of hypnotizing people. And they would think that something was happening and they were being healed. So the word mesmerize comes from his name.
Interesting.
Phineas Quimby was a very big New Thought leader and had ideas about healing. They taught that there is no really heaven or hell, and God is very distant. He's either kind of an energy or a principle. And Jesus came to teach us that our perception of reality is wrong. So we aren't perceiving reality the way it really is. And what they did was they took, a lot of the New Thought leaders took the Christian teachings in the Bible and reinterpreted them. So for example, the kingdom of heaven is actually a place within you when you realize these truths that New Thought is teaching. When you realize that you have never been separated from God, that God's always been a part of you, and you've always been a part of God, and that you are going to, that you have the ability to create what you want. You have the ability with your mind and your thoughts to manipulate reality. And this was a big teaching in New Thought, and that developed very strongly. And the New Thought movement led in the United States. It led to some popular people like Norman Vincent Peale. And Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking, had studied the teachings of some New Thought people like Ernest Holmes, who co-founded the Church of Religious Science, which was a New Thought church. And one of the things to be aware of for Christians is that New Thought, especially the later part of the movement and the part of the movement that influences the New Age, claimed to be Christian. And so they would actually claim they were Christian. The Unity Church, which is another New Thought church, claims that it teaches practical Christianity. So it has this seemingly Christian element to it, but they actually are teaching a completely different form of Christianity. They aren't teaching Christianity, but they use the Bible.
Satan works that way, though, doesn't he?
Exactly.
He puts us on this track that seems right, but unless you know what the Bible says and the character and nature of God, you're going to be fooled.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't know the attributes of God, which I've learned is a very important thing to understand. And fortunately, Southern Evangelical Seminary, that was a big focus. And the classic theism view of God's attributes is very helpful to know. When you have that under your belt, it helps you recognize a lot of bad teachings. And it helps you understand how bad teachings also can develop when you have the wrong idea of who God is. It changes where you go. It changes your trajectory. So anyway, yeah, so the New Thought ideas of God, of course, were completely messed up. So New Thought sometimes is very deceptive because it claims to be Christian and it refers to the Bible. It will quote the Bible. You know, it'll talk about Jesus. And sometimes people are really fooled into thinking it's Christianity. Mm-hmm. And the three big New Thought churches are Unity, Church of Religious Science, and the third one is the Christian Science Church. And actually, Mary Baker Eddy, who founded the Christian Science Church, used a lot of Quimby's. I mentioned Phineas Quimby earlier as a New Thought leader. She used a lot of Quimby's teachings to the extent that she was charged with plagiarism. And yeah, and I think actually there's still lawsuits still going on about that. I don't follow up that kind of thing, but I think there's been a lot of legal issues around that. So those are the three New Thought churches. And also there's a Church of Divine Science, which is another one. It's not as big as those three, but it still exists and still has, and it's a church. So it looks like a regular church, and you go into these churches. And in the Unity Church, which actually I attended a Unity Church for a short time, they will even sing songs, and they will sing the Lord's Prayer. And you know, you almost think you're in a Christian church, but
wow,
you listen to the teachings, and if you know what Christianity is, you can tell it's not. You know, but it's so weird because you think it's Christian and then it's not. You know. So anyway, New Thought believes that Jesus was a regular man, a regular human, who realized he had a divine nature. And when he realized he had this divine nature and who he was, he attained a state of mind called Christ consciousness. And this term Christ consciousness is very big in the New Age. So what you have here is that a lot of New Thought teachings overlap with the New Age. But the New Thought movement and the New Age movement are still two distinct movements, and they still have a lot of differences. But then there's a huge overlap as well. So those are the three areas that the New Age mainly draws from. It draws from other things too, like theosophy. But theosophy was I don't know what you want to call it, a movement, a group that was organized by Madame Blavatsky. And she was Russian, and she was into some Hindu type teachings and into some occult ideas. And theosophy became a whole big thing that did influence the culture. A lot of famous people got involved. And a lot of the early New Age leaders were influenced by theosophy.
Was she one of the ones who influenced someone like, I think I did a study on some of this, not obviously, I'm having you here because you're the expert in it. But Shirley MacLaine, was Shirley MacLaine influenced by her?
I don't know if she was influenced by Madame Blavatsky or not. I'm not sure. I know the David Spangler, who was one of the earliest New Age, if you want to call him kind of New Age spokespersons, was very heavily influenced by theosophy. One thing about theosophy that is good to know is that they were Luciferians. Now, Luciferians are not the same as Satanists. Luciferians believe that Lucifer was an angel of wisdom that came to try to help man in the garden. And because he tried to help man, God punished him. Because actually he's an angel of wisdom. And so they believe in seeking the wisdom that Lucifer was trying to offer. And so Lucifer is seen as a good figure, you know, this good, benevolent angel. And
is that not like the enemy?
Yes, it really is. It in a way, it's more deceptive than Satanism, because Satanism is more obviously anti-Christian because it's Satan and he hates you know, he hates God, and people who go into Satanism pretty much are very, very strongly anti-Christian. But Luciferians will mix Christianity with their teachings, and that's what Theosophy did. So it had this kind of esoteric Christianity, and that was an influence too, and the idea that some people thought that was real Christianity.
Have you written anything on that?
I haven't written on Theosophy. I never truly studied it. I did read a book by one of the Theosophy leaders, Annie Besant, and I was very influenced by that book. But I never read Blavatsky or any of the other people, and I never had a strong interest. I was interested in Theosophy. Theosophy, I think I was talking about Theosophy. And so that is another area that influenced the New Age. And oh, you were asking me if I was telling you that I had not really delved into it.
Okay.
And I had read that one book, and I was interested in some of its teachings, but it seemed a little too, in some ways, too extreme to me.
Okay.
Their teachings were, to me, more narrow because they had this certain view, and that was the view, period. And I was a person who wanted more open-ended teachings, you know, and I didn't want to be stuck in one kind of worldview.
Okay.
So I like to mix things, you know, which is typical of the New Age.
Yeah.
So
it is.
So the Theosophy was kind of interesting, and there was actually a Theosophical Society in Atlanta where I was living, and they had weekly meetings, and I was taking classes and going to these weekly meetings at this place called Foundation of Truth. And Foundation of Truth was a very New Age place. They taught things like past life regression, astrology, numerology. I mean, you name it, they taught it. And some of the teachers there were members of the Theosophical Society and also went to meetings with them. Okay. So I was aware of it, and I had considered going to some meetings, and then I felt like they were sort of passé, like their heyday was gone.
Oh.
And I wanted to be more current, you know. So I didn't want to go back in time to something from, it seemed dusty to me, you know, like, I don't know, not as relevant. So anyway, so those are the three areas. And as far as, that was a long answer to defining what the New Age is, but I think it's important for people to get a good idea of it. So I was in the New Age, and I was an astrologer, and I was interested in all of these all three areas that I talked about. I adopted beliefs from all three of those areas: the Gnostic, the Eastern, and some of New Thought. Not as much of New Thought as other people I knew, but some of it.
Okay.
And what we're seeing in the culture, as far as the New Age and in the church, one of the big areas I have seen ever since, I would say, the late 90s, I really noticed this.
Marcia, can I stop you there? Can you tell us, because I don't think everybody understands what an astrologer is. I think that would help to define what you were really into and what these people are about.
Yes, good point. Yeah, astrology is not astronomy. A lot of people confuse them. So astronomy is the scientific study of outer space and the stars and the planets, you know, looking at them as physical objects, figuring out the distance and what they're made of and how they're moving, and all of that is astronomy. It's considered a science. It has controversial aspects to it because we don't know everything. We don't even know how many stars there are, or how many galaxies there are, which to me is wonderful because it shows, you know, God's creation is so vast.
Yes. That
we, just like God, we don't know, God has no limits in the sense of we can, you know, totally outline something and say, here's God, you know.
Right.
We do know attributes. We know about who God is because he's revealed them to us in the Bible. But we don't, he's so infinite and so beyond us. We can't totally grasp him. And it's the same for the universe he made. We can't see the end of the universe. We can't say, oh yeah, like 4 billion miles there and it stops.
Right.
You know, and
Yes.
we can't say, yes, there's X number of galaxies. And I think that's wonderful because to me, it reflects the creator.
Yeah.
So
Infinite.
that's astronomy. Astrology is mostly looking at the planets that are in our solar system, you know, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and looking at where they are at certain points of time and interpreting them. So an astrologer sees Saturn, but also sees Saturn as meaning something, which an astronomer would not think Mars or Saturn mean anything. They're just planets, right?
Yeah.
An
Right.
astrologer sees a meaning. So the astrologer mainly does birth charts for people. So they do charts based on the time and place of birth. And the position of the planets in the chart, which are put in a circle, supposedly are like a blueprint of your life. And the astrologer will interpret that for the person. And you can do relationship charts. You can do composite charts. You can do charts for buildings. If you know when the building was dedicated, you could do a chart for like the Empire State Building.
Really?
You can do a chart for countries. Yeah, if you do charts for like buildings or countries or cities or events, like you could do a chart for, I don't know, maybe an earthquake if you knew the moment it started. That's called mundane astrology because mundane comes from the Latin word for world. So it's astrology of worldly events and worldly things, not people. So in other words, it's like things and events instead of people.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
very interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of another form of astrology that I didn't do a lot of it, but sometimes I would be interested if I would hear some event on the news, you know, that happened, something important. Then if you knew when it started, then you could do a chart for it. You know,
wow.
Supposedly that would help you understand what it meant and what was going on.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that was a form of astrology, but I was mainly doing birth charts with people and relationship charts. And so that is astrology. And astrology actually is a form of divination, which God very clearly condemns in the Bible.
Yeah.
Divination is when you're trying to get information through some kind of non-natural means. So you're either getting it from a supernatural source, or you're reading hidden meanings into things that actually those meanings aren't there. So you think Mars means this and Venus means that, and actually they don't. They're just planets. They don't have any meaning beyond what they are as a planet. But astrologers and people into this kind of thinking, New Agers and people who do things like astrology, see a meaning in everything. And I was like that. So that's what I did.
Wasn't this really, really big in the 70s? And they even had songs about these?
Are you thinking of like the musical Hair? The Age of Aquarius. They have a song, The Age of Aquarius. This is the dawning of the Age of Aquarius.
I am.
Yeah.
Is that related?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think astrology started to get, it's always been somewhat popular in this country since the 1800s, but I think it started to get more popular around the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And it was a part of that musical Hair. And also the idea of zodiac signs. People would ask, you know, if you were at a party, it was very normal for someone to come up and say, well, what's your, you know, I'm an Aries, what's your zodiac sign? You know, and that was kind of a normal conversation thing that went on. I mean, people still do it, but I think it became very common then. So yeah, that was a big thing. I became a licensed astrologer in 1983.
So you had to get a license?
I had to practice legally in the city of Atlanta. I had to be licensed, and to qualify for the business license,
yes,
I had to show that I passed an exam.
Okay.
And they had an exam set up in Atlanta by the astrology board there. And it was a 7-hour exam. It's very difficult. Wow. The first part of it is all math. You have to calculate the chart from memory. You're given the data. We couldn't have any kind of calculator or anything. And we had to calculate. You have to know certain formulas to do that. So you have to memorize them. And math was my worst subject in school. I mean, it wasn't just my worst subject. I was terrible at it. I was absolutely when I got a C in geometry, I was so grateful because I was very close to getting a D. I was terrible. And
So
I
how did
struggled through algebra. But I was so determined to do astrology. I was so motivated that I learned the formulas.
wow.
And so that's the first part of the test. The second part of the exam is to interpret a chart. They give you another chart, not the one that you calculate, because you might calculate it wrong. They give you a chart of a real person. They don't tell you who it is. And they ask you to write out an interpretation as though you were talking to that person.
Okay.
They want to see if you can, talk to somebody. Like if you see something really negative in the chart, they want to see that you can present that to the person without freaking them out, basically.
Okay.
So that was the exam, and I passed the exam, and then I was able to purchase the license. And so I practiced professionally as a licensed astrologer.
Wow.
For 8 years. I studied for 2 years, and during those 2 years, I practiced on people for like $10. People I knew. I'd be like, "Do you want me to do your chart? It's only $10. I need practice," and so I did. I practiced on people,
Wow.
and that was my profession. I saw myself. That was my calling, my identity. I was very dedicated to astrology. I loved it. So much over anything else, numerology, palm reading. I knew a little bit about numerology and palm reading and other tarot cards. I had tarot cards, but, astrology for me was it.
Okay.
Anyway, so as far as one of the big areas that I have seen come into the church starting in the 90s is what is called alternative healing.
Mm.
And the reason it's called alternative is because it's not medical. That's why it's called alternative. It either hasn't been tested, or it's been tested and it failed, or it can't be tested because it has too many variables. There's no consistency to it. For example, homeopathy. There's no consistency to how homeopathic remedies are prescribed, so you can't even test it. There's so many variables in it. And of course, it's based on occult concepts. And yet homeopathy is very big in the Christian community.
Wow.
It's big among certain areas, like maybe some homeschooling areas, or just people who, I don't know, who think that it's natural or something like that. They think it's better because it's an alternative to medicinal drugs, pharmaceutical drugs. But homeopathy is based on occult principles. It has nothing about it is logical. It's a completely illogical system, and actually believes that the more you dilute something, the more powerful it becomes. So
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. Even for Christianity, the more you dilute it, it doesn't make sense.
No, and I'm always pointing this out. I've been exposing homeopathy on Facebook from time to time. I'll do a post on it. And a lot of people did not realize that's what it was. They didn't realize what it consisted of, that it was based on these goofy ideas. And then some people still think it's good because they think it helped them. So, you have this problem in the church. This is what I see as a big problem in the church as far as the New Age goes. You have a mindset. If it works, then it must be good. And that is a very bad criteria because some things will work that are not good, or they may seem to work. Right. Some things work by the placebo effect. And some things work because it's coincidence. Some things work because you've also taken conventional treatments. And then you do the alternative and you get better, and you say, well, the alternative made me better. But it may be because you also did conventional things.
Right.
But, you can't evaluate. If something is based on a spiritual belief that is contrary to the Bible, then it should be rejected, even if you think it works. So if it's based just on the spiritual belief and not on any objective data or anything scientific that you can show how it works, then it should be rejected. Right. And you have things like acupuncture based on a spiritual belief from Taoism that there's an energy that runs through these invisible channels in your body called meridians, and the energy is chi, or it's CHI or QI or KI, depending on if you're in China, Japan, or Korea. So it's chi or ki. So this energy runs through these channels. And when it's blocked or unbalanced, you have pain or illness. And so the needles are put in certain parts of the body where it's supposed to balance the chi or release the chi to flow. And that will supposedly solve your problem. Now that is a spiritual belief. It's not, the meridians don't exist, of course, and chi doesn't exist. It certainly doesn't exist as a universal life force. And so if you accept acupuncture knowing that that's what it's based on and that no studies have shown it to be valid, which is the case, pretty much in 2011, after studying this since 1993, NIH, the National Institutes of Health, did a whole big study of alternative methods.
Mm-hmm.
And it was shown that for acupuncture, in a few very small cases, it seemed to have a small effect for very specific things, like I think after dental surgery, pain after dental surgery, something that had to do with the knees. I can't remember if it was knee surgery or something, and one or two other things. But on the whole, they didn't find any scientific basis for it. There was no way to explain how it worked medically or biologically. And in a lot of the studies, sham acupuncture worked better than real acupuncture. So sham acupuncture, when people thought they were actually getting the needles put in them and they weren't. And actually some of them actually got better than the people who got the real acupuncture treatment.
So is it sham like what it sounds like? It's a sham?
It's a pretend, yeah. They had to do blind studies. So it's the same thing as if they're doing a study like they did recently with a vaccine.
Okay.
They had a group of people that really got the vaccine for COVID, and they had a group of people that got shots, but it wasn't the vaccine.
Okay.
It was just, but they didn't tell, the way you have to do it is a blind study, so you can't tell people what they're getting.
Right.
And then the large number group of people who got the shots that were not the real vaccine got the virus, whereas the group that got the vaccine, very few got it. And so then they can compare. See, that's a blind study. And so this was like a blind study with acupuncture, but since it's not taking a medicine orally or getting a shot of something injected, they had to have needles that seemed to be, they either put them in the wrong place, according to acupuncture, or they didn't really put the needle in. I'm not sure. But they didn't actually do the real thing. And then they had a group that got the real acupuncture treatment.
It's interesting because some insurances actually are covering acupuncture.
Yes,
And
some do.
that makes me a little upset because there's more proof that a deep tissue massage, will actually help you in many ways if you have some chiropractic problems or just misalignments and getting be put back in line. And insurances will not cover that, but they'll cover what you're telling me, acupuncture.
Yes, and I don't know why. Maybe the acupuncturists have a very effective lobby in Congress or something, because it is kind of a big industry in itself. And unfortunately, there are actually Christian acupuncturists, and a lot of Christians will try it. Now, I get a lot of questions about it. A lot of Christians ask me on Facebook about acupuncture, either because they've heard something or they're just wondering about it. So a lot of people are kind of aware that maybe this isn't really a completely solid thing, solid medical thing. Okay. And it's not. And people have asked me would I ever do it, and I said no, I would never do it. I know a few people who told me they had very bad experiences with it, where they had what they considered to be demonic experiences after getting an acupuncture treatment. And nightmares or something really horrible that they saw, and they felt they connected it to the acupuncture. Now, of course, I can't say for sure that caused it, but I've had people tell me that.
Wow.
And not just acupuncture, but with some other alternative healing too. Energy healing, for example. Reiki is one of the big energy healings, but there's several forms of it. There's healing touch, healing hands. I don't know. There's all kinds of names where you supposedly, you sometimes you touch the person, sometimes you may have your hands like right above them,
Mm-hmm.
and you're sort of transmitting a healing energy to the person. This is very occultic. This is really something that's done, in witchcraft and in the New Age. I had psychics, quote unquote, heal me with me sitting in a chair and then them like, holding their hands over certain parts of my body.
Mm-hmm.
And so this kind of healing to me is very blatantly occultic. And I think it's dangerous because I don't think these people actually are able to manipulate anything and they aren't actually healing you. But I think when you sit there and open yourself up to it, it's just like consulting a psychic. You're opening yourself up to something that's demonic.
Yes.
I think it's
Yes.
evil.
And
And you
you
mentioned alignment and chiropractor,
yeah.
but I have to tell you, chiropractic came straight out of spiritualism and a belief called vitalism in the
Oh,
1800s, which was a belief that this vital force animates everything and you
okay.
could control it for healing. And it became part of it was in chiropractic and osteopathy. They both started. Palmer, D.D. Palmer, who started chiropractic, was involved in spiritualism and in contact with spirits, and also believed in these vital forces. I mean, he was completely into the occult, and he started chiropractic because he
Wow.
believed that you had to this energy, and he believed in two forces in the body. One was called innate, and I can't remember the name of the other one. I just read this the other day. I'm reading this book that is incredible. It's called Republic of Mind and Spirit. It's over 500 pages.
Wow.
It's a history of metaphysical religions in the United States. And she has a huge section on spiritualism, a huge section on New Thought. And part of it is these people, like the people who started chiropractic and osteopathy. And I just finished reading those sections. And I already knew some, but I know a lot more now that I read that. And so what happened with chiropractic is that it was this very spiritual belief system for a long time. And then later, some people started just emphasizing the alignment, the physical alignments, and not buying into all of the spiritual part.
Okay.
But even the physical alignment is not medically validated. So a lot of people I know, they go and get adjusted and they feel better. And I used to go to chiropractors. My chiropractor when I was in the New Age was a witch, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She
Which
was a
we'll be
very good
talking about.
chiropractor. If you believe in it, she was a good chiropractor. But what I learned when I became a Christian and I moved, I started going to a chiropractor, and then I noticed he was doing these new agey things,
Mm.
and I got convicted. And I had just started speaking. I didn't have my ministry, but people were inviting me to speak about the New Age or give my testimony. And I got convicted about it. And I thought, I can't go out there and explain the dangers of the New Age if I'm participating in it. And I have a very bad back, and I just stopped going cold turkey. And I hurt my back like 3 times since then. And each time I've been able to recover. I do have a bad back still. I've been having some chronic back pain, but part of that is probably arthritis. But I would not want to compromise by going to a chiropractor, even if I thought it could help me.
Sure.
But what I discovered is that the adjustments, they tell you need them, but you don't really need them. If you go without them, you'll still be okay. So anyway, I don't want to get into that too much. But this
fine.
idea of in the New Age, there's an idea that natural is better, and that idea has seeped into the church. And so there's this prejudice against using pharmaceutical drugs, and this idea that you have to natural is always better, which is not true. Natural is not always better. The drugs, yes, are very potent, and yes, there are side effects, but that's because in order to work, they have to be potent, or they can't work. That's why they have side effects, and especially for something serious. If you're taking a drug for a serious condition, it's probably going to be pretty strong.
Yes.
And Yeah, you might get, I've had that. I've had side effects from some medicines I've taken, but I'm also alive because of some of the drugs I've taken. If I threw away my pills today, I would probably be dead within a matter of a few months. I would be dead. So, I am grateful for the fact that God gave us a world that we
Yeah.
can explore and investigate, and we can test things.
Yeah.
And drugs are tested. They go through rigorous testing.
Yes.
And this based on objective data. So Christians, if we care about the truth because we say Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life.
Right.
And we want to share the truth with people. So if truth really means something to us as Christians, we need to care about it in every area of our life. And that includes alternative healing.
Yeah.
And the truth of alternative healing is that almost all of it, or pretty much all of it, is based either on spiritual beliefs or pseudoscience or a combination. So,
Right.
that's the message I give on this area, because it's an area I've had to battle on, because I get a lot of pushback on this. I mean,
Right.
I get people very angry with me.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I do.
I'm sure
And
it's a hot environment right now with the no vacciners.
yes,
Um,
yes,
and
yes,
I really didn't realize a lot of it was Christians behind that. There are others. It's
yeah,
not
there
just
are others.
Christians.
Yeah,
But for me, it's God gave us knowledge. He allows us and doctors and researchers to have that knowledge, whether they recognize it or not. They are given a gift of being able to explore. Like you say, he's given us this beautiful gift to explore in biology and
right,
astronomy out there in
right.
astrophysics. Um, and so it's a wonderful thing that these researchers can come up with um, medications that can actually help and save lives
That
or
save lives.
prolong
Yeah, save
life.
lives like mine. I mean, and people do. Our lives are saved. There are a lot of people today who would 50 years ago, and certainly 100 years ago, would be dead
Yeah.
because they wouldn't have had the medications. Remember my grandmother telling me that she had 5 children, one of whom died around age 3. And I remember her telling me that it was common for people to have children who died. Like, that
Yeah.
was not unusual for a family to have several children and then one of them die
Yeah.
young because of an illness. And my grandmother said that was just kind of the norm. And it was because they didn't have a lot of the medicines for some of the things that could be treated today. Like my grandmother's child who died of pneumonia at age 3. Today, it's possible she could have been treated,
Right.
and healed.
Right.
So, that's what I see, like you. I see God has blessed us with people who can study these things and come up with things to treat to treat some illnesses.
Yes.
So I'm grateful,
Me
frankly.
too. Me
Um,
too.
so
What
that's
other areas Marcia, what other areas do you see where this new age? I know there's many, and
yeah,
we can't possibly cover them all,
no.
and that's very relevant today. But what other areas have you seen where the new age thought process has been rather destructive to the church?
Yes, there's a big area that I call contemplative spirituality.
Oh,
And this started really back maybe in like around 2000. It probably started before, but I think I started seeing it more in the early 2000s. And this came from several sources. And it has different names. So there's things that are called spiritual formation
mm-hmm.
and the spiritual disciplines.
Yeah.
These are all part of this contemplative spirituality. A big chunk of it comes from medieval monasticism. And that's where the term spiritual director, and spiritual directors is another term, and spiritual formation and the spiritual disciplines all come from something actually that the monks were doing.
Yeah.
The Roman Catholic monks.
Yes.
And it got sort of a revival, partly through these three Trappist monks, Thomas Keating, William Menninger, and Basil Pennington, who started a modern, they called the censoring prayer movement. They started in the 1970s, based partly on the teachings and ideas of Thomas Merton, who had been a monk back a little earlier. I mean, he didn't die that long ago. He died in 1968. But Thomas Merton got very interested in Buddhism and went to Asia. He actually wrote some books on Buddhist ideas as a good thing. And he thought that Buddhist meditation and Christian meditation were similar. And so he felt that Buddhism had things we could learn from. And Thomas Merton, I've actually read some books by Thomas Merton. So I really think that he was sort of a closet Buddhist. I think he really wanted to be a Buddhist. But because of his position, in the Catholic Church, and he couldn't just say, okay, I'm going to be a Buddhist. Right. But he wrote a lot of letters to people that were not published till after his death. And in those letters, he writes about how, Buddhism really was special to him. And basically, he saw himself pretty much as a Buddhist.
And he was.
Yeah. And so Thomas Merton influenced these three men, and they drew on some Eastern spiritual teachings for the practice of their centering prayer. And actually, the word centering they got from Thomas Merton. It was something along the lines of you go through your center to go to the center of God. And that's where the word centering, which doesn't make any sense. Or it may be that you go through God's center and get to the center of yourself. But either way, it doesn't make any sense. And that was something Thomas Merton said. And they took that word center and made it centering prayer. Later, Thomas Keating called it contemplative because his website was called Contemplative Outreach. He died 2 years ago, but I've gone to his website. He was probably the most active of the three men. Both he and Basil Pennington wrote books, and I have read books by each of them. I've heard Thomas Keating speak in person, so I'm very familiar with their teachings and their thinking. Mm-hmm. Thomas Keating actually had Buddhist monks come to the abbey where he was to teach the monks how to do Buddhist meditation. And he also had a man who had been a monk and then had become a follower of transcendental meditation. Excuse me.
That was a big movement.
Transcendental meditation became a big movement in the 70s.
Yes.
Started in the 60s, became big in the 70s and 80s. My college roommate became a follower of it. And it's a form of Hindu meditation, mm-hmm. where you repeat words, a mantra, and you meditate specifically for like 20 minutes a day. And or 20 minutes twice a day. He had this guy come in and teach transcendental meditation to the monks. And in the books I read by Pennington and Keating, they actually, the instructions they give for doing the kind of prayer or meditation they teach is very similar to the kind of methods that I used for Hindu and Buddhist meditation that I did. Mm-hmm. So I was like reading it and thinking, this is what I did when I was in the New Age. This is not in the Bible. It's right. Not how we're told to pray in the Bible. It's not in the Bible. Prayer is modeled for us, especially by Jesus. Mm-hmm. Plus, the disciples asked him, how should we pray?
Right.
And he told them. It's like, here's how you should pray.
Right.
You can't get more clear than that.
Yep, Matthew 6, I believe.
Yes.
And not only that, he tells us not to do chants or repeating,
not to
repetitious.
Repeat. Yes.
That God hates that, because then your heart's not really in it. It's just
right.
a mantra where you're just going over and over words.
Yeah.
Trying to create something.
Yeah.
And he said, no, I don't want that. Yeah.
Exactly. So I was very disturbed when I was reading these teachings, and then I was seeing them get into the church. So in 2005, I wrote an article called Contemplative Prayer, Is It Really Prayer? And that talks about these three men, and I talk about all the ideas in contemplative prayer and how they are opposed to biblical teachings, biblical doctrine. And so that article is on my website, and probably my most comprehensive article, even though it was my first one. Since then, I've written other articles. For example, what started happening in the church is that people came along like Richard Foster and Dallas Willard, who were influenced by Thomas Keating and his group. They were directly influenced by them, and they started teaching the spiritual disciplines.
Yes.
Richard Foster, who's still alive, is a Quaker, and so I think that makes him more open to this stuff.
Yes.
And his book, Celebration of Discipline, was a huge hit in the church. I read it. I had a lot of issues with it. And another issue with Richard Foster, this is separate from the contemplative stuff, is that Richard Foster was mentored by a woman named Agnes Sanford. Agnes Sanford had been a New Thought follower and then allegedly converted to Christianity. But a lot of her ideas were still very New Thought. She basically was still following New Thought concepts.
Right.
And she apparently taught some of these to Richard Foster because they're in his book, especially the chapter on prayer. He actually gives New Thought methods for praying, like visualizing white light. And when I read that, I was shocked because I knew those were New Thought practices.
And that's a big deal, because even myself, who went to seminary for 5 years for my MDiv, not my doctorate, and I always tell my students, okay, it was for this degree, not for this degree, because the seminaries were vastly different. One believed in the inerrancy of Scripture, my doctorate. The other one did not. And we had a class on spiritual formation.
Oh, yes.
That's what it was called.
Yes.
And we did contemplative prayer, and we did walking the labyrinth.
Yes, the labyrinth is another one.
Yes, and then I went to, I started going to a church with my daughter in 2014, which is I think the pastor's wonderful, but I think there were some associate pastors in the church that were very influenced by Dallas Willard.
Yeah.
And they had, during Holy Week, had the people who wanted to sign up for it would do contemplative prayer at Stations of the Cross. Yes.
Oh.
And this church it was a contemporary church, and the pastor himself does believe in the inerrancy of Scripture. But I think it's incredibly important for ministerial leaders to truly grill people before they hire them. Because they don't know, and especially it should be a red flag, like you say, Dallas Willard. If they've studied under that person or read a lot of their books, they can be influenced by that and not even realize they're bringing that into the Christian church.
Yes, exactly. And that's what happened. And it started getting into, the more conservative churches. Mm-hmm. And it's gotten now into some of the conservative seminaries. Yeah. Because they've instituted these spiritual formation programs, and I've heard from people in them, and what they are studying are things that I have been exposing in my ministry as unbiblical. Yeah. And there's some big figures in this movement now. Now the Thomas Keating and Basil Pennington have passed on. They're no longer alive. William Meninger's still alive. I don't think he wrote any book. I saw him on a YouTube video. He's very much older. I mean, Keating was in his 80s when he died. I think Meninger was the youngest one, but he's still older and still out there. And actually, he was at a church. There's a very popular man named Peter Scazzero who wrote The Emotionally Healthy Church. He had William Meninger at his church because he thinks Meninger is great. Scazzero is very heavily into this contemplative stuff.
Okay.
And I did a Facebook post on him because of that, because people kept asking me about him. So I went and watched him do a couple of talks, and including where he had William Meninger as a guest at his church, telling the people about these practices. Mm. And I thought, man, he's just opening the door. He's the pastor. He's supposed to guard the flock.
Yeah.
But he's introducing them instead to these unbiblical practices. Now, what I've noticed, now people may be hearing all this and wondering, okay, well, maybe it's not so terrible. Maybe, doing this isn't exactly the best way to pray or whatever. But, what's so horrible about it? I can tell you what is bad about it is that it undermines the authority of Scripture, and it undermines sound doctrine, because these practices are experiential oriented, and they lead to where you not only have these experiences that you think are from God that may not be from God,
Yeah.
but where you start wanting more of them. And so the normative practice for a Christian of reading and studying God's word, reading it, thinking about it, in a devotional way, or studying it in a more analytical way, however you do it, where you're really feeding on God's word. That's part of how we grow as a Christian. That becomes not as exciting as sitting and doing one of these mystical methods where you might have this feeling of being close to God. So the experience starts drawing you to want more of it. And I know this is a New Ager, because the New Age is experience oriented.
Yes.
And so you're constantly seeking new things and new ways to have experiences that you think are spiritual. And that's what this contemplative spirituality has done. In around 2000, I think it's either 2005, 6, or 7. I'm sorry, it's one of those years. I think it's 2006 or 2007.
Mm-hmm.
This DVD called the Be Still DVD came out. Richard Foster and Dallas Willard are the two people who put it out. On that DVD is Beth Moore, who's very popular,
Mm-hmm.
Priscilla Shire, who at the time was not that well known, but now is very popular women's, or she's seen as a women's Bible teacher.
Right.
As Beth Moore is as well. They both are on there with some other people endorsing this contemplative prayer. And the title, of course, Be Still. I'm sure most people know that's going to come from Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God.
Mm-hmm.
If you read that psalm, you can see it has nothing to do with prayer or contemplation. It has, and the New American Standard translates that verse as cease striving. And some other versions translate it differently too. And what God is doing, God is speaking in Psalm 46, and he's saying, those of you who are struggling against me and rising up against me, and those of you who are concerned about all these, like God's people were concerned about these people against them,
Mm-hmm.
warring against them. God is saying, you have to look to me. Look to me, because I am God. Don't struggle with these fears, because that means you're not trusting me. Look to me and trust me. Be still and know that I am God. That's what God is saying. That's the context of it. It's trust me. It's not sit down and quiet your breathing and dim the lights. Breathe slowly and then just close your eyes and go into the state or go within or whatever. That's not what it means.
Right.
And so that is one of the most misused verses of the Bible today, and it's being used to support this contemplative spirituality. So that's another big area that's in the church that is connected to New Age ideas of going within, listening for something supernatural, which they think is God,
Yeah.
and then not really paying attention to God's word. You drift away from it.
Right. Well, that is there. I know there's so much more. We could talk forever. Next time we have Marcia back as a guest, we're going to look into the reality of witches. And a lot of people don't understand how powerful that entire Wicca, I guess, I don't even want to call it a ministry, but it's like an industry almost.
Yeah, it is.
And it's a real thing. So we're going to talk about it next time. And thank you again, Marcia, for coming on. And I really am excited about our next gathering.